Well, it's one of the most anticipated Masters in recent memory. Welcome to our 2016 preview presented by Titleist. I'm joined by iSeekGolf.com analyst Bruce Young, and the excitement is at fever pitch down here in Sydney. I'm sure it's the same way up there in Queensland.
Rod, good morning to you. Yes, I agree with you. It is one of the most eagerly anticipated majors, of course, and I think this year perhaps more so because of the fact that it's so open this year. So many of the leading chances are playing well ahead of the event. Two Australians very much in the mix and genuine favourites heading into the event. So there's a lot to look forward to, perhaps more so than ever before at the Masters this year.
Absolutely. Let's dig a little bit deeper, Bruce. We'll start with the Australians. The current world number one, Jason Day, probably the in-form player in the game of the last month or so. It's been a very interesting lead-up to this major for him. 2 wins, and he does start as probably the favourite.
Well, Rod, Jason Day's form's so amazing at the moment, isn't it? We all saw those great wins that he had at the WGC event at the match play and the week prior to that at Bay Hill, how convincingly he won those tournaments, perhaps not necessarily with his A game. So he leads into this week's event not only with his game in pretty good shape, but his confidence at an all-time high. And I think that's just so important ahead of what is going to be a demanding test.
Indeed. We know he's a big game player, Bruce. How does that form work into this week's Masters on a course where, frankly, he's performed pretty well?
Well, he's had a tremendous run at Augusta National ever since that debut back in 2011 when he tied for second with Adam Scott behind Charles Schwartzel. Both of them run down late in the tournament by a rampaging, you might say, Charles Schwartzel, who birdied the last 4 holes. And since then, he's played Augusta National pretty well. He's followed up with a 3rd place, as you can see on screen, and a couple of other solid midfield finishes. But he's given an indication from very early on, not only does he have the game for Augusta National, but he's subsequently proved that he has the game for the big time, and he regularly produces great tournaments in big events.
Well, of course, Bruce, if he does happen to get across the line this week, he'll become the 2nd Australian Masters winner, the first Adam Scott. He too has had a really good start to this season.
Well, he didn't play in Houston last week, of course, but he too was playing very well. I know the match play wasn't particularly good for him, but a lot of players, because of the nature of the format of that match play, they missed out on making it to the round of 16. But I think if you look back prior to that, Adam Scott was playing beautifully, not only with the 2 wins that he had, but he was runner-up in the event prior to that. So he brings some amazing form to this week's event. And we know that he won at Augusta National, but he too, as I mentioned earlier, finished runner-up alongside of Jason Day behind Charles Schwartzel. So right from his debut back in 2002 when he finished 9th at Augusta National, this has always been a major that's perhaps been earmarked as one that Adam Scott would do well, and the results that you're seeing tell the story of a tournament that he really likes. He has a comfort zone at Augusta National, has the game for it. We know he's got the short putter this year. Whether that's going to make a difference remains to be seen. But he's in tremendous form and no doubt with a lot of confidence.
Yeah, normally you'd think there was just some Australian bias, Bruce, but those 2 are genuine favourites. There are, of course, 5 Australians in this field. The last 3 will be Mark Leishman, Stephen Bowditch, Cameron Smith. 2 of them somewhat known entities, 1 not. Just some thoughts on those 3 players as they get ready to play this week in Georgia.
Well, we mentioned that Jason Day is a big-time player, but so to some extent is Mark Leishman because of the fact that he finished 4th behind Adam Scott when he won here 3 years ago, and he did finish runner-up at the Open Championship last year. I just don't think Mark's perhaps quite where he needs to be a contender this year. I mean, if he did, you wouldn't be totally surprised given his previous record, but there is a bit of concern about his current form. And I suppose Stephen Bowditch, despite the fact that he's had 1 start for a 26th place, which I think was a very good debut a couple of years ago, he's playing so badly at the moment. He just seems to be so far from his best at the moment that it's hard to imagine him being around for the weekend. And Cameron Smith, well, he showed last year at the US Open on debut that he could produce it at the big time. He had a pretty solid week last week in Houston where he finished 19th. So I think Cameron Smith has a chance to make the weekend. And I think if he does that on debut, he can be very satisfied with his first appearance at Augusta National.
Yeah, you can only imagine the butterflies that must be going through their stomach. Of course, Bruce, we want it to be an all-Australian affair. It's not. There are plenty of great players in good form heading into this week. What I'd like you to do now is pick a winner for me.
Oh, thanks very much, Rod. Look, I'm actually paid at times, believe it or not, to be an analyst for these sort of things. But this year I'm finding it incredibly difficult to sort out just one that is my favourite. I think when you look at the leading 4 players in the world, of the 3, maybe Days, McIlroy, Spieth have all got arguments to suggest they can win. Adam Scott, obviously, we've discussed. Could it be a left-hander? Could it be Bubba Watson or Phil Mickelson? Left-handers with really an amazing record in this event over the last 10 to 15 years or so. I think they've won 6 of the last 13 Masters. So I'm just really reluctant to put a finger on the potential winner. I might have splinters in my backside by the end of the week because I'm sitting on the fence so much here. But I think that's what makes this such a juicy prospect this week, that so many players are potential winners. And not only those that I've mentioned, you can go outside of that group and maybe look for a first-time major winner in a Stenson or a Dustin Johnson or a Hideki Matsuyama. And let's not forget Charles Schwartzel, the form that he's in at the moment, and the fact that he's won this event previously. I find it too difficult to try and name one.
Yeah, I understand exactly what you're saying. I'm going to go with Rory McIlroy, flying under the radar, lots to play for, everyone else being talked about. Might just be the year he'll sneak up and grab it. Bruce, is there in the field somewhere a dark horse? We do see people pop up on the leaderboard at Augusta we didn't expect. Is there one that might do it this year?
Well, I mentioned Matsuyama earlier on, and the fact that he's had such a good record at Augusta National. He was the leading amateur there when he first played there. On debut, he made the cut the second time he was there, and then he finished fifth or sixth, I think it was last year. So he's got a very good record, and he's playing pretty darn well at the moment with a win earlier in the season. I think it was in Phoenix or in Scottsdale when he won. So there's a lot to like about Matsuyama as a potential dark horse for one if you were trying to chase a player away from the more fancy candidates and you were looking for value. But Rod, it's the old story in these events. They're only value if they realise it and convert it into a win. But on paper, at least, Matsuyama seems good outside value.
Yeah, that's a huge limb you've gone out on there, Bruce, and thanks for that. I'm going to go with Jim Herman. The man's on a roll. He's going to be so happy to be here this week. Who knows what he might be able to do, Bruce? Can't wait to talk to you during the week when we do our wrap-ups each day.
Cheers, Rod.